Have you ever sat around a dinner table listening to family stories
Hmm.
and you're thinking, wait a minute, that's not how I remember it.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating how our experiences kind of filter into this collective memory and they become the stories that we tell about ourselves,
Mhm.
about who we are.
Right.
And that's what we're diving into today, the power of narratives. And specifically in the context of history,
Okay.
we've got some excerpts from Tamim Ansari's book, The Invention of Yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's really a thought-provoking look at how humans have constructed our understanding of the past,
Mm.
and then how those narratives really shape our present and future.
You know what's really intriguing about Ansari's work is that he approaches this from a very unique perspective,
Right.
having grown up kind of straddling two cultures, Afghan and American,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives him this really powerful insight into how different societies construct their narratives.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about, dates and facts,
Mm-hmm.
but about the lenses through which we interpret those facts.
And that bicultural lens allows him to see how narratives often unconsciously reinforce power structures.
Right.
He asks the question, whose stories are being told and whose are being silenced? And how does that shape our understanding of the world? So if you are enjoying this deep dive, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes where we dissect complex ideas just like this.
So let's dive into Ansari's core argument.
Okay.
He basically posits that human history is essentially a story that we tell one another,
Okay.
and that it's constantly evolving as
Wow.
we interact with our environment, our
Cool.
language, and the tools that we create.
Okay.
He uses this analogy of a wall,
Oh, okay.
how humans are constantly building walls, both literal and metaphorical, to define ourselves in relation to the world around us.
Okay, help me understand this. How does he tie that into the idea of storytelling and history?
Well, think of it this way. These walls could be physical structures, like the Great Wall of China,
Okay.
or they could be social norms,
Okay.
laws, even the stories we tell ourselves about our past.
Yeah.
Each one is a way of creating boundaries, of saying, this is who we are, and this is what separates us from others. And those stories become the building blocks of our collective identity.
So it's not just about adapting to our environment. It's about how we use language and tools to create meaning from that environment and then pass those meanings down through generations.
Exactly. And Ansari argues that these three factors, environment, language, and tools, are in a constant interplay, each one shaping and influencing the others.
Okay.
And it's not a static process. For example, think about how the invention of the printing press, a tool, fundamentally changed the way stories were told and shared. It democratized knowledge, but it also created new power dynamics. Suddenly, those who controlled the printing presses had immense influence over the narratives that shaped society. And that brings us to another one of Ansari's key concepts.
Okay.
The social self.
Okay. I found this idea really intriguing. So it's like our individual sense of self extends beyond our physical bodies. It's shaped by our interactions and shared narratives within groups.
Precisely. Think about it. You're not just you. You're also a member of a family, a community, a nation.
Yeah.
And each of those groups has its own narrative, its own story that helps define who you are within that context. Have you ever noticed your identity shift depending on the group that you're with?
Oh, for sure.
How you might emphasize different aspects of yourself or even tell different stories about your past?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, that happens all the time.
Right.
The stories I tell at a family gathering are going to be different from the ones that I share with my coworkers.
Yeah.
I might downplay certain aspects of myself or highlight others depending on who I'm with.
Right.
So our understanding of who we are is always being negotiated in relation to the groups that we belong to.
That's a great observation. And it brings us to the question of power. Ansari argues that narratives often serve to maintain the power structures of society. Whoever controls the narrative controls the power.
So are you saying that history is just a tool used by the powerful to legitimize their control?
It's not quite that simple, but it is crucial to understand that narratives are never neutral. They're always imbued with power dynamics.
Okay.
Think about historical narratives that were used to justify colonialism or slavery.
Right.
Those stories were not simply objective accounts of the past.
Okay, yeah.
They were very carefully constructed to serve the interests of those in power.
Right.
They dehumanized entire groups of people
Right.
and justified their exploitation.
Yeah.
And these power dynamics continue to play out today.
Go.
Take, for example, the debate surrounding the 1619 Project.
Right. The 1619 Project is a great example of how challenging established narratives can lead to both conflict and a reassessment of our understanding of history.
Absolutely.
Right.
It deliberately places the legacy of slavery.
And the contributions of Black Americans at the center of the American narrative,
Right.
which challenges the traditional story we've been told.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, this has sparked a lot of controversy.
Yeah. Some people argue that it's divisive.
Yeah.
And that it paints an overly negative picture of American history.
Right.
While others say it's essential for understanding the complexities of the American experience.
Right.
Right.
The 1619 Project forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our past.
Yeah.
And how those truths continue to shape the present. It's a great example of how narratives are constantly being negotiated and rewritten as new voices and perspectives emerge.
Absolutely.
It also highlights the emotional power of stories.
The debate surrounding the 1619 Project isn't just about facts and dates.
Right.
It's about identity,
Right.
belonging, and whose voices get heard.
Exactly.
These are deeply personal and emotional issues, and they demonstrate how narratives are not simply academic exercises.
Right.
They have real-world consequences. This leads us to a larger question. How is technology, especially the internet, impacting our individual narratives?
Right.
The internet, with its algorithms and echo chambers,
Yeah.
is shaping how we see ourselves and the world in really profound ways.
It's almost overwhelming to think about.
Yeah.
We're bombarded with information from all sides.
Right.
It's hard to know what to trust.
And Sari even goes as far as to describe the algorithm as a bookstore that no one else has ever seen or ever will.
Wow.
What he means is that the internet is personalizing our experiences.
Right.
Filtering the information we see based on our past behavior and preferences. It can create a sense of isolation where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Yeah. So if we're all living in these personalized information bubbles, how can we possibly hope to find a shared narrative? It seems like technology is pushing us further apart rather than bringing us together.
It's a valid concern.
Right.
And it's one that Ansari grapples with in his book. He worries that this fragmentation is making it increasingly difficult to find common ground,
Right.
especially when it comes to addressing global challenges like climate change.
Yeah.
But he's not entirely pessimistic.
Well,
He believes that we need to find a narrative that encompasses all of humanity, a story that allows us to see ourselves as part of a global we,
okay.
while still acknowledging our individual differences.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but how do we even begin to construct that kind of narrative in a world that feels so divided?
It's a monumental task,
Right.
and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But Ansari's work offers a starting point.
Okay.
He challenges us to become more critical thinkers, to
Right.
question the stories we're told,
Yeah.
and to be open to different perspectives.
That's a powerful message. And I think it's one that resonates deeply with our listeners
Right.
who are trying to make sense of this complex world.
Right.
We're all in this together,
We are.
trying to figure out how to write a better story for humanity.
Exactly. And Ansar argues that throughout history, the ability to revise our narratives has been key to our adaptation and progress as a species.
So it's not about finding the right narrative once and for all, but about being willing to constantly adapt and evolve our stories as we learn and grow.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to Ansari's belief that a monumental, even mythic-sized project could help unite humanity.
Right.
But what could that project be in the 21st century?
Yeah.
We'll explore that very question after a quick...
Yeah.
Just kidding. We don't do breaks here, so let's jump right in.
Welcome back. We left off with the question of what a shared project for the 21st century might look like.
Right.
And Ansari points to the Transcontinental Railroad in the U.S. as an example.
Okay.
Imagine in the midst of the Civil War, this incredibly ambitious project
Wow.
to physically connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
That's a powerful image, uniting a fractured nation through a shared endeavor.
Yeah.
It took incredible collaboration and vision, but what could possibly be a modern equivalent on a global scale?
Ansari doesn't give a concrete answer, But he suggests that it needs to be something that transcends national boundaries
Okay.
and speaks to our collective future, something that requires collaboration, innovation, and a shared sense of purpose.
So it's not just about solving a specific problem like climate change.
Right.
It's about finding a positive vision for the future that can inspire us to work together.
Right?
But what if that vision, in attempting to unify, creates an us versus them mentality?
That's a question that Ansari grapples with as well.
Oh?
He acknowledges that historically the creation of a shared identity often involves defining ourselves in opposition to an other. We see this all the time, right?
Yeah.
Nationalism,
Yeah.
religious conflict,
Right.
even sports rivalries
Yeah.
often rely on this dynamic of us versus them.
Hmm.
It's a primal instinct to define ourselves in relation to those who are different, right? But if we're trying to create a global we, can we do so without resorting to that kind of exclusionary thinking?
Right.
It feels like a paradox.
It's a difficult balance to strike.
Yeah.
But I think Ansari is suggesting that it's possible to create a shared identity that is inclusive rather than exclusive.
Okay, I'm curious about how Ansari's own experience straddling two cultures influenced his thinking on this.
Well, he talks about feeling like an outsider in both Afghanistan and America, which forced him to question the narratives he'd been told about identity and belonging.
Right.
It made him realize that there's no one right story, and that our understanding of ourselves and the world is constantly evolving.
So rather than clinging to fixed narratives,
Right.
he's encouraging us to be more fluid and open to different perspectives.
Precisely. And I think his bicultural background gave him a unique sensitivity to the complexities of identity. He understands that we are all multifaceted beings and that our identities are shaped by a multitude of factors.
Right. Including our culture, our family history,
Right.
our personal experiences, and the stories we choose to tell about ourselves.
So the key is to embrace that complexity, to be open to new ideas, and to engage in a constant process of dialogue and learning.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, through that process, we can start to weave a new narrative that is inclusive and hopeful.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
It's not about erasing our individual identities or pretending that our differences don't matter.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of a larger human story and that our unique perspectives can contribute to a richer and more vibrant tapestry.
Ansari's work is so relevant to the challenges we face in the 21st century.
Yeah.
This idea of challenging the narratives we've been told and being open to new ways of seeing the world.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And I think it's a message that resonates deeply with our listeners.
Right.
We're all seeking to understand our place in the world and to find a sense of meaning and connection.
And maybe, just maybe, by exploring these complex ideas together, we can start to imagine a more hopeful and unified future.
I like to think so.
Right.
We are, after all, a species that thrives on stories. And it's never too late to start writing a new chapter.
Like a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface of Ansari's work and the broader implications of his ideas.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to unpack, and we encourage our listeners to check out The Invention of Yesterday for themselves.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating read that will challenge your assumptions about history and the power of narratives.
And we'll be back with part 2 to continue our exploration. We'll delve deeper into Ansari's ideas and discuss some potential paths forward in our quest for a shared narrative in the 21st century. See you soon.
See you then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the power of narratives.
We left off talking about the need for a shared narrative in the 21st century.
Yeah, we were exploring Temi Mansari's suggestion that a monumental project, something on a global scale, could help unite humanity.
He used the Transcontinental Railroad as a historical example.
Right. A project that physically and symbolically connected a divided nation.
But finding a modern equivalent, something that could capture the imagination of the entire world, feels daunting.
It does, doesn't it? But perhaps we're thinking about it too literally.
What do you mean?
Well, maybe the project isn't a single tangible thing.
Okay.
Like a railroad or a space station. Maybe it's more about a shift in our collective mindset.
A shift in our narratives.
Exactly. Perhaps the shared project is the ongoing process of dialogue, listening, and understanding.
So instead of focusing on a specific outcome, the project is the journey itself. The continuous effort to bridge divides and create a more inclusive world.
That's a compelling thought, because the challenges we face today, like climate change, poverty, and inequality, they require a fundamental shift in how we relate to one another and to the planet.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness,
Huh.
recognizing that we're all part of a larger web of life.
And that our actions have consequences that ripple far beyond our immediate circles.
But how do we encourage that kind of global thinking when we're constantly bombarded with messages that emphasize individualism and competition?
That's where the power of storytelling comes in. We need narratives that highlight our shared humanity, narratives that inspire empathy and cooperation.
Stories that show what's possible when we work together towards a common goal.
Exactly. And those stories exist. We just need to amplify them. Think about the scientists collaborating across borders to develop vaccines, or the activists working tirelessly to protect our planet.
Those are the kinds of narratives we need to be celebrating, the stories that demonstrate the power of collective action.
Because when we see ourselves reflected in those stories, when we see the possibility of a better future, it can inspire us to act, to become part of something larger than ourselves.
It's about shifting from a narrative of scarcity and competition to one of abundance and collaboration.
From us versus them to we're all in this together.
It sounds almost utopian, doesn't it?
It does. But I think Ensari would argue that it's not about achieving some perfect state of unity. It's about the ongoing process of striving towards a more just and equitable world.
It's about recognizing that we're all on a journey and that we're constantly learning and evolving.
And that the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we choose to believe in, play a powerful role in shaping that journey.
So what are some concrete steps we can take as individuals to contribute to this shift in narrative?
I think it starts with being more mindful of the stories we consume and the stories we share.
Are we perpetuating narratives that divide and dehumanize? Or are we amplifying stories that inspire hope and connection?
It's about being critical consumers of information and being aware of the biases and agendas that often shape the narratives we encounter.
It's also about seeking out diverse perspectives, listening to voices that are often marginalized or silenced.
Because the more we expose ourselves to different ways of seeing the world, the more nuanced and compassionate our own understanding becomes.
And that expanded understanding can then inform the stories we tell, the actions we take, and the world we create.
Ensari's work reminds us that we have a choice. We can passively accept the narratives that are handed to us, or we can actively participate in shaping a more just and compassionate world.
And that participation starts with examining our own beliefs and biases.
It's about being willing to have difficult conversations, to challenge our assumptions, and to embrace the complexity of the human experience.
It's about recognizing that we're all flawed and imperfect, but that we're all capable of growth and change.
And that the stories we tell ourselves, both individually and collectively, have the power to shape that growth and change.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. It's really challenged me to think more deeply about the power of narratives and the role they play in shaping our world.
Me too. Ensari's work offers a powerful framework for understanding how we got to where we are and for imagining a more hopeful future.
And it reminds us that we all have a part to play in shaping that future. We're not just passive consumers of stories, we're active creators.
That's right. We all have the power to tell our stories, to listen to the stories of others, and to work together to create a more just and compassionate world.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
But before we do, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question from Ensari himself. What shared project could unite humanity in the 21st century?
We encourage you to reflect on that question, to share your ideas with us, and to keep exploring the power of narratives in your own life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep telling your story. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
We've been exploring Temi Mansari's The Invention of Yesterday.
And how those stories that we tell shape our understanding of history, but also of ourselves.
Yeah, Ansari really argues that finding a shared narrative is absolutely crucial for humanity's future.
Especially as we think about a world that's facing these complex challenges like climate change.
Right. He suggests that a monumental project could really help unite us.
Like the Transcontinental Railroad did in the U.S. in the 19th century.
Right. But what could be like a modern equivalent? A project that would resonate globally.
And we were just discussing this idea that maybe it's not about a physical project at all.
Right. Maybe it's a shift in our collective mindset.
Yeah.
A new way of seeing ourselves and the world.
A narrative of interconnectedness and cooperation and shared responsibility.
A story that acknowledges our differences.
Yeah.
While emphasizing at the same time our common humanity.
Because ultimately the challenges that we face transcend national borders and individual identities.
Right, climate change, poverty, inequality, these are all global issues that demand global solutions.
And those solutions require like a fundamental shift in our thinking, a move away from this us versus them mentality that has just dominated human history.
It's a tall order,
Yeah.
but Ansari's work does offer a glimmer of hope. He reminds us that humans have always been storytellers.
Right.
And that the stories that we tell have the power to shape our reality.
If we can change the narrative, we can change the world.
So what kind of story do we want to tell? What future do we want to create?
Ansari doesn't give us all the answers,
Right.
but he gives us a framework for thinking about these questions.
He encourages us to be critical consumers of information, to question the narratives that we're told, and to seek out diverse perspectives.
To be aware of our own biases and to engage in open and honest dialogue with those who hold different views.
And to recognize that our understanding of the world is constantly evolving, that there is always more to learn.
And most importantly, to believe in the possibility of a better future.
Because if we don't believe it's possible, we won't even try to create it.
His book is a call to action. It's a challenge to each of us to become more conscious and intentional storytellers.
To use the power of narrative, to build bridges, to foster understanding, and to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the invention of yesterday, we want to leave you with a final thought. To ponder.
What stories will you choose to tell? What narratives will you help to shape?
The future is unwritten.
It is.
And the pen is in our hands.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
We hope you'll continue to explore the power of narratives in your own life.
And we look forward to diving into more fascinating topics with you in future episodes.